Prince Pahlavi, you mentioned that that you think the opposition, if you will, in Iran should have its day, and I'm wondering how you think that revelations like this morning might affect the agenda there, and might affect the way other countries in the Middle East look at Iran, and how Iran in turn reacts to other countries in the Middle East. So maybe we could start that off.
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me from the prism of the opposition as opposed to the regime.
Well, either way. In other words, the regime obviously is trying to restrain the opposition from having its day. But the sense that we have, in fact, this wonderful piece that was in our magazine suggests that there is, in fact, a broad consensus across the political spectrum in Iran that some sort of an independent nuclear fuel cycle, short of a bomb, is something that would be in Iran's broader national and even international interests.
Well, I'm trying to be as brief as possible on the subject. I wish to remind everyone here that, after all, the very same countries who are today pushing for further sanctions on my country over the nuclear issue were the very same country who were competing in selling us the technology before the revolution. What has changed here? Is it an element of trust? Is it an element of transparency? Is it a country that stands up to its commitment when it signs a treaty, like the NPT, for instance? What is it that has changed? That should be the fundamental question. I've always said on this issue, number one, that it's not a question of technology, but the finger on the trigger. I don't think anybody in the world will dispute the fact that any sovereign nation has the right to pursue technology naturally for peaceful purposes. And the reason why the world, and today is even further validated in having reasons to doubt the sincerity or transparency of the clerical regime and its true intentions, are certainly understandable. And it is certainly understood by Iranians as a nation. We realize that the adventurism that the regime is committed to, ultimately for its own survival, or with the hope of using a nuclear deterrent as an equalizer to reduce the level of conflict at manageable levels, as opposed to a full-scale conventional military conflict, serves as further institutionalizing itself in the region to create their own vision of clerical hegemony, but also to continue supporting groups such as Hezbollah and Hamas without having any retaliation possible, which is really the reason why they need the bomb, not to go and bomb Israel, but using it as a deterrent. So we have to separate the regime's interest here and Iran's national interest. When we looked at the nuclear issue back in the early 70s, which was part of my own father's agenda, was to reduce our use of oil as such a precious commodity solely as a fossil fuel, and try to reduce the use of it both at the domestic level and use it most for export to increase our income, but to also look at alternative sources of energy. And back then, even though solar energy was an option, or gas turbines were an option, they were technologically difficult to acquire, much more expensive, and even though the nuclear thing was still, in terms of cost efficiency, debatable, but it was the next best thing, which is why we opted to go that way. Iran signed the NPT. We were, as a result of that, 10% shareholders in Eurodif, which was supposed to supply Iran with nuclear rods for our first two reactors that were supposed to start being operational, if I'm not mistaken, by 1982, the Bushehr 1 and 2 reactor. Of course, the revolution happened. Everything went to a freeze. And since then, if you forward tape from 1979 to present day, the world has been quite suspicious of the regime's true intentions. So on that note, I think today it is one of the central debates.
Reza, the final word, that we end as we began with you.
Thank you very much. Well, of the tons of things I wish to be able to say, but we don't have time. When 9/11 happened, I saw celebration on many streets of different Arab countries. The only country in which people stood in vigil, candlelight vigil, in sympathy to the U.S. victims was in fact the Iranian people under the clerical regime that is chanting death to America for the past 30 years. I keep hearing Muslim world, as if it's a clash between the Christian world and the Muslim world. No, I think it's a relationship between democratic countries and undemocratic countries. I wish to leave you with this thought. you have to be able to consider Iranian people in the sense of not only your natural allies, but people who are smart enough to understand where they stand now, having gone through many experiences for the past century, at least in contemporary history. A nation that has over 3 millenniums worth of national identity, culture, civilization, a sense of identity. I find it rather odd that nobody challenges when Ahmadinejad seems to be far more concerned about the fate of the Palestinians be determined by a referendum. Why not put their own regime under question, a referendum for Iranians? That's what we want. It's about, at the end of the day, the sanctity of the ballot box. It is about, at the end of the day, self-determination. What happened about 3 months ago in Iran, ever since the 12th of June, the Green Movement, is today, I think, the best description of where Iranians stand today. They didn't go on the streets writing slogans in French or English to impress somebody in Isfahan or Shiraz. It was meant for the outside world. My fellow compatriots, the youth you're pointing out, are perplexed over the fact that how come no dialogue has ever been engaged with them? Nobody disputes the fact that world governments have to have a channel of dialogue, even with the most unpopular regimes that may be, from North Africa to where else? North Korea to wherever else. But I think it is time to consider the fact that if we want to resolve things with, at the minimal cost possible, and to allow for an evolution to happen, that element has been lacking. I don't think Mr. Obama, or for that matter, Mr. Sarkozy or anybody else, should have to apologize to the clerical regime of having the liberty to talk to whoever they want inside Iran whenever they want. And last point, I beg to differ with you when you say that increasing more sanctions will perhaps lead people to stay behind a popular regime. Listen to the latest slogans. I think that's very important, especially in our part of the world. People that chant slogans on the streets, look a little bit more into it. What were the latest slogans in Iran? The ringleaders were trying to have them chant death to Israel and death to America. The response was death to Russia, death to China. The latest slogans on the so-called Quds Day, which was coined by Khomeini as a day to show solidarity for Palestine. People were saying, Na Gaza, na Lebanon, Janam Fadai Iran, which means neither Gaza nor Lebanon. May I sacrifice my life for my country. That means what? That means Hamas, that means Hezbollah. Because that factory worker who hasn't been paid a salary for the past 9 months, who earns maybe 4 years' worth of his salary is being given to a family of a Hezbollah in Lebanon, are questioning where the priorities are. Just trust in that aspect. Trust in the fact that people in Iran are not unaware of the importance of where they can come to terms. That's what I think the West in particular needs to understand. And I do agree when it was said that there are different forms of democracies. But let's not confuse the forms of democracies with the semblance of a pretense to have democracy. A lot of people in the Western media were saying, well, at least in Iran they have elections. Well, didn't they have it in the Soviet Union? Didn't they have it under Saddam Hussein? Does it mean anything? Of course not. So I think that's where we need to really better read between the lines and understand. And only more dialogue will be beneficial because there will be a better understanding. Iranians are well past cultural exchange. They know you better than you know it. That's not their problem. Their problem is they don't have the opportunity to express themselves, which is what democracy is all about. That's what we need to focus on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.